And to discuss this Sunday's presidential runoff in Peru, we now welcome Kayla Popuchet, who's a political analyst and member of the Pumas Collective, a media and information group of the Peruvian diaspora in the United States and Canada. Kayla, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me once again.
Kayla, you've been following the electoral campaign and the voting today. What can you tell us about what things are looking like for the two candidates?
Well, if we recall in the April elections that Pedro Castillo of Peru had done extremely well in the center and the southern provinces of Peru, where there's a majority working class and peasant community, more farmland, beginning to industrialize, whereas Keiko Fujimori of the Fuerza Popular and other candidates who were very similar to her did better in the coastal regions. Additionally, we can also remember that congressionally, Peru Libre outperformed all of the other parties than, even Keiko Fujimori's party, exceeding them at number one. So they have the majority of the as representation in the Congress, despite whoever becomes president today. In the days leading up to today's election, we did see that a lot of the mainstream Peruvian media was showing polls that were more favorable to Keiko, even some saying that she will win. Despite what the elections before looked like in the first round and what those polls originally looked like. But we also got to remember that those polls, those medias are often historically known to have been bought out by Fujimoristas and even have Fujimoristas working amongst them. So we got to take them at a grain of salt. So tonight at 7:30 p.m. Lima time, it'll be 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We will actually see the flash electoral votes, which are coming slightly from exit polls and what they will predict. But we won't know any official votes until 11:30 p.m. Lima time tonight. But what we can remember, what we can see is that even today in Tumbes, in the province of Tumbes, there was a member of the Fujimorista party. She was working at the electoral site, and she was arrested for stuffing in votes for Keiko Fujimori. Likewise, in Surquillo, which is a neighborhood in Lima, there was a Peru Libre supporter who had to walk back to her house with her hands up in the air as Fujimoristas were yelling at her, insulting her, and she put up her hands up in the air to show that she was non-violent. So we can see that the Fujimoristas are very desperate. They're very desperate to win. They will do anything that they can to win, and they will stop at nothing. But majorly, the Fujimoristas only have an overwhelming power in Lima, where you'll see that there's the wealthy, the power, the rich, especially in neighborhoods like Miraflores, San Isidro, San Borjas, and Surquillo. Whereas the rest of Lima, despite being working class and being poor, they often you have a whole generation of people who were sent to private schools because Fujimorismo had completely killed the public education sector, had taken money away from public education. So now you have a whole generation of people who've been taught by privately educated institutions and have been brainwashed and have been taught to despise any popular movements, to despise socialism, to despise anything that would revitalize the economy and the face of communism. But likewise, you have people in La Sierra, in the mountainous regions, in La Selva, in the jungle, where they were the first victims of Senderismo, and the first victims of Fujimori, the Peruvian military, and they are going out into the streets overwhelmingly showing support for Pedro Castillo. And I think that shows a major divide that our country is about to face, whether it be Pedro Castillo or it be Keiko Fujimori, that at the end of the day, this country is extremely divided. 1/3 of the Peruvian population lives in Lima, while 2/3 live outside of Lima, but yet Lima has so much power. And Limeños, unfortunately, see themselves only as the face of the country, whereas the other 2/3 of the country are often ignored and have historical roots as to why they're ignored. But it shows a lot that despite that this is the breeding ground of where Senderismo was, the Maoist guerrillas, and also where the Peruvian military was active, the people in these regions have not forgotten what Fujimorismo has done to Peru. They've been the first victims of the Peruvian military and the first victims of the Maoist guerrillas, and yet they still come out in support for the popular resistance and for popular movements represented by Pedro Castillo.
Kayla, as you've been mentioning there, we know a lot about Keiko Fujimori, what she represents, but Pedro Castillo is more of a newcomer to the scene. We're talking about two very, very different candidates, two opposite poles. What can you tell us about each and what they stand for?
All right, well, I've been making the joke in the past few weeks that it's almost like the insurgency of the 80s and the 90s, but in the ballot form. You do have Pedro Castillo, who's part of a Marxist party, though, he's a social democrat, a left-leaning socialist, and then you have Keiko Fujimori, who is to the far right, extreme neoliberal, completely supports free market policies, austerity, selling more Peruvian land to foreign capital, and increasing the wealth of Peru's elite while ignoring and taking away resources from the bottom masses of the Peruvian people, which in 30 years has led Peru to this day being the worst COVID-affected country in the world. And this is a country where there's only 30 million people, and yet it is the worst affected country in the world, which is a product of Fujimorism. Now, Pedro Castillo, on the other hand, he's an educator, he's a farmer, he's someone that's from the Cajamarca, he's from the countryside. He's a man that has emerged out of the people, which is, remember again, in April 11th, I think it was CNN España that they didn't even have a picture of Pedro Castillo, and they put his name out there because he is a man who has just emerged out of the people, but being one with the people. The policies that he wants to do is to nationalize all of Peru's major resources. And Peru is a bedhouse of so much biodiversity. It's the second most biodiverse country in the world, where you have minerals, you have the coastline, you have so much resources in Peru to nationalize and bring that back into the Peruvian economy. He also wants to increase the GDP that goes into the educational budget from 3.5%, which is what Fujimorismo has left, to 10%, to reinvigorate the public health education sector, as well as public health care, which is part of the reason why Peru is the worst COVID-affected country, because access to medical care, affordable Medicare, is slim in Peru. There are hardly any hospitals that people can access. You have Cuban doctors coming into Peru, trying to help Peruvians, and going online to ask for help to get their COVID-affected patients at least into a hospital bed. It's a complete disaster that Fujimorismo has left Peru in the past 30 years, and Keiko Fujimori wants to maintain the system. Again, Keiko Fujimori has also promised to pardon her father, who is sitting in jail right now for crimes against humanity, who is facing trial for the forced sterilization of Native women, who had led and funded a death squad against Native people in Peru. And she has promised to pardon him, and yet this is somehow the face of democracy. Peruvians have been claiming for the past 30 years that the whole judicial system is completely corrupt. And it's true. In 2019, 68 of the lawmakers, which are there 130, 68 of them were under investigation from charges from corruption and fraud to even murder. So there is a lot of rampant corruption in Peru. And Keiko Fujimori is known to have been part of this herself. She's under investigation and had just been conditionally released from prison in April for embezzlement into her 2011 campaign. And yet this is somehow the saving of democracy. So we're looking at a country that's becoming increasingly divided. We have the rest of the country, 2/3 of the country, that are tired of being ignored, tired of dying, tired of not having popular representation. And then you have 1/3, part of which are people who are trying to maintain their wealth, maintain their power, and the other people who unfortunately have been indoctrinated into a system by these elites to think that anything socialist, anything leftist is going to take away their democracy, and that this same system that has been killing them for the past 30 years is somehow better than a popular uprising, a popular movement, somehow better than a new Peru.
Kayla, as you say, really high stakes for Peruvians today, but not just for Peru. How important is this election for the wider region?
Well, Peru is a bedhouse of imperialism. And it's funny because whoever gets inaugurated as president in July 28th, it will become the 200th anniversary of Peruvian independence. Even 200 years ago, Peru was a bedhouse of the bastion of the Spanish Empire. And to this day, it is still a bastion of U.S. and foreign imperialism. Peru has been, and specifically Lima, has been a leader in trying to attempt coup attempts and regime change in Venezuela, has supported Ivan Duque and Uribismo in Colombia, supports Bolsonaro, has been an enemy to our brothers in Bolivia. And so with the fall of Lima to imperialism, fall from imperialism and back into the hands of the Peruvian people, will set a new stage for all of South America, to be honest. the left will have regained power, and especially in Lima, where this is a country that is so rich. It compared often to New York, right? Washington, D.C. would be like Bogota, where there's a lot of militaristic power, it is the brains, but Lima, like New York, is the heart of imperialism in South America. It is the heart of the financial heart of capital. And so for it to capitulate to the popular movements, to the actual Peruvian people, would set a lot of popular risings, a lot of support and solidarity to the socialist governments that exist and to the left-leaning governments that exist throughout all of South America. And it would leave countries like Colombia and Brazil cornered, looking at their neighbors who have regained their sovereignty and their liberation and said no more to foreign capital, no more to these compradors who are selling our resources out and leaving us to die. So we will see in July 28th whether Peru continues to maintain on the path of collapse, because that is what imperialism is going to do. It is going to collapse Peruvian society. Or on our 200th anniversary of independence, we will regain a new Peru, a new and popular constitution, a new movement to create a new Peru, refundar el Peru. We just have to see, and we'll find out later tonight whether Peru is going to take a new path or continue down on this dark, brittle road of poverty and suffering.
Kayla Popuchet, political analyst and a member of the Pumas Collective, which is a media and information group of the Peruvian diaspora in the US and Canada. Thank you so much for joining us today and for offering your very valuable insight into these crucial elections for Peru's future direction. Thank you.